Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves are world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation.
Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. These are the Kia Studios of Sports Radio 92.9 The Game on a Sunday morning. As we continue through the weekend, and the Atlanta Braves unfortunately continue through a rough patch of their season. Another rough patch, to be more precise, and this one may feel a little bit more ominous than the first, if that was even possible. That is the conversation, in short, that we're going to be having today. But there are a lot of tentacles to this thing, so we're going to be trying to unwind and maybe figure out how in the world the Braves can address some of this stuff, because it has been, if you're a Braves fan, a baseball fan, an Atlanta sports fan, of even the most casual level, and you were just hoping to see your hometown team find its way through a successful season, this has pretty much been the exact opposite of that for the Braves. They have faced a lot of adversity, some of which of their own doing, and they have been unable to figure out a way to get themselves on track, consistently scoring runs. And one of the many things I'll tell you on this show, and in general, you got to score more than the other guys if you want to win games. And that just has not been happening for the Braves to the level that they need it to, and quite frankly, to the level that it should be based on the talent that they have collected, the talent in that lineup, the ability that they've shown in the past that inexplicably become harder and harder and harder to apply to this year. I don't know. There's going to be a lot of questions being asked about how you fix it. We're going to try to get into some of that on the show and at least size up where the Braves are. And unfortunately, to be the bearer of bad news right here off the top, they got an awful lot of catching up to do if they want to get where they want to and set out to at the start of the season, and that is a trip to October. Now, that's a long ways away, and for many people, I think that the prevailing sentiment has been that this does not look like a club that's going to make it to October, let alone have success once it gets there. And it's hard to disagree with that. I mean, I watch this club as closely as just about anybody. I mean, it's what I do. It's what I've done for a long time. Even before I was doing this for a living, I was doing this growing up, watching some Braves teams that, quite honestly, were pretty forgettable in the 1980s. We didn't have a whole lot going on. And then a little something happened in 1991, and I think all of our expectations have been sky high ever since. But the Braves have accomplished a lot over the last 35 years. However, when you look at the 2025 club and you measure it against the expectations of those clubs over the last, let's call it 35 years, to say that they've underperformed and maybe the most underperforming group of that bunch would not be a stretch. The numbers bear it out. Their record bears it out. Inside of the record, I'm going to get into this a little bit later. I spent a lot of time, not because I'm a masochist, but because I'm trying to be a realist about this season, looking at where the Braves are, why they are where they are record-wise, and when the last time was that they found themselves in this kind of a position. So we're going to use history as a little bit of a point of reference, at least for context's sake, and see what it tells us. And one thing that history does tell us is that the Braves have started slow before, and they have figured out a way to turn it around. But again, I think it's the eye test right now, and the inconsistency of this offense, and the fact that we're not just talking about 2025 couple of bad months. We're tracking this thing back over 13-plus calendar months at this point, because the Braves offense really has not been the same and has not been at its productive level on a consistent basis since the 1st of May, 2024. We didn't want to celebrate that anniversary. Not trying to drag the miseries out over multiple seasons. You can have a bad year. Trust me. Players individually can have a bad year. A team can have a bad year. I think we've all seen and experienced that to some level before. That's all part of baseball. It's unpredictable. You make the best plan that you can over the winter, into the spring, maybe even over the regular season. Things are looking great, and then all of a sudden, baseball takes a sharp left turn and does what it's going to do. And that, in some ways, is the beauty of the game, but it's also the frustration of the game. And I think the Braves have been, unfortunately, subjected to more of the frustrations of the game than the beauty of it here in 2025. And I'm going to dig into it because it's baffling in a lot of different ways. And then in others, when you start to just look at the cold, hard numbers and facts, this team is telling you exactly what it is, and more importantly, is telling you what it is not at this point. And the Braves find themselves in another tailspin as if the 0-7 start to the season wasn't bad enough. They're in the midst of another long losing streak, and they're sinking in the standings because the Mets have picked up their pace of play, and the Braves have picked a really bad time to have another long losing streak. You look at these National League East standings, and things are starting to look a little less than hopeful. And we just turned the calendar to the month of June. We're in, the second full week heading into it of this month. And the Braves, if they're not careful, could be double digits back in the wild card race. Not in the East. They're already there on that one. As we talk here on Sunday morning on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, and for those of you listening to the podcast a little bit later, a 13-game deficit for the Braves. I got a lot of stats. I'm going to go ahead and give you one of them right now. You want to know the last time the Braves were 13 games out in the division race? It was the second half of 2017 when they were in a little thing called the rebuild, when they did not have a team that was full of all-stars and full of former World Series champions. It was not that. This was a team trying to just figure out how to win games, how to get to 500, and then beyond that, they would take those steps as they became available. But a lot of things have happened in the last 7 years, and that, I think, is kind of where you start to look at how did things get to the level that they are right now, and how did it seemingly happen pretty quickly? I mean, 2023 wasn't that long ago, but as I've talked about on my call-ins on this show and just about anywhere else I talk about the Braves, I think as much as anything, you have to look at 2023 as an outlier of a season because it was the best that it could possibly ever be. You're not going to do that every year, and that's fine. And you're going to hear from Alex Anthopoulos a little bit later because he did a media session at the start of the week as the Braves made a rather curious coaching change decision and brought back the manager of the club prior to Brian Snitker to serve as the third base coach. That's right, Fredi Gonzalez back in a Braves uniform. If I told you that on opening day, I think a lot of people would have been like, wait, what? I mean, even if you like Fredi, and I do, I think he's a great addition to a coaching staff. I think we can understand and accept, hey, maybe he doesn't need to be the manager of the club, and maybe that ship has sailed, and that's fine. I think he can accept that too, but he can be a net positive if he can hold down that third base coaching job, which became, unfortunately, one of the little pieces that wasn't working right for the Braves. And when you can't change the big pieces on the board, maybe you just do whatever little incremental thing you can. So you had a coaching change in the midst of this week with Fredi Gonzalez coming back to be the third base coach. But that's not going to be the thing that turns the Braves around. Let's not get it twisted. I don't think anybody was presenting it that way. It had reached a critical mass. And I think last Friday when the Braves were at home, or Friday before last, I guess, against the Boston Red Sox, and Matt Tuiasosopo sent Ronald Acuna Jr. to score from first, and he would have been out at home plate by about 20, 25 feet, that was just kind of the last straw on those. But you just want to do the things that you can to improve. But it's not the third base coach's fault that the Braves aren't winning close games. It is a collective for this team, and in particular, I have to look at the offense. And we'll talk about the meltdown that happened at Truist Park against the Arizona Diamondbacks on Thursday, because I guess we're obligated to do that as we try to cover the week that was for the Atlanta Braves, however unfun it may be. But it has not been a whole bunch of games where the Braves offense has shown up and scored 10 runs and lost. That is the only time that that's happened this year. It's just been a lot of close games and no margin for error for the pitching staff and an offense that since May 1st of last year ranks in the lower third of Major League Baseball in runs scored, and that occurs right after that 2023 season in which they set franchise records and led Major League Baseball in runs scored. How does it get to that point? Well, I did some digging into the stats. I also asked around. You're going to hear my conversation with Austin Riley a little bit later in this show, because a big part of the Braves and their turnaround in 2022 in particular was they just couldn't seem to get things going, so they had a closed-door meeting. And when they had a closed-door meeting, all of a sudden the Braves just caught fire in the month of June and tracked down the New York Mets and won the National League East, and we had all kinds of fun until we got to the postseason, and then the Philadelphia Phillies unfortunately spoiled the party. But that second half and that drive to the postseason in 2022 is exactly the kind of thing the Braves find themselves in need of here in 2025. But can this club do it? Jury's out. But the prognosis does not look so great just based on the numbers that we're seeing. But I asked Austin Riley about it, about the struggles that these guys have been through for over a year now, the mindset that goes inside of that, and what is the criteria for closing the doors and having a meeting and trying to get yourself on track? Because I've had a lot of people ask me on social media, I mean, it's a time for closed-door meeting. What can Brian Snitker do? What can he say? What can the hitting coach say? What can Alex Anthopoulos say? I don't know that anybody can say anything else. Ultimately, I mean, and you'll hear from Alex Anthopoulos later as well, if they could figure it out and it was as simple as flipping a switch, they would have done it by now. So this is as confounding and baffling as I've seen for a team to be dealing with seemingly the same issue, which is hitting with runners on base primarily and creating a productive offense that can give its pitching staff the foundation to win a baseball game. The pitching staff is not the greatest that the Braves have ever had, but it is more than adequate to have won more games than the Braves find themselves as they head into the series finale against the San Francisco Giants on Sunday afternoon at 27-36 and losers of 6 in a row. It's quite the tailspin, and that's where the Braves find themselves. And this week was eventful. Much of it was strange and unfortunate with the coaching change, and then you had a former star who made a long-awaited return in a lot of ways to the Braves, even if he wasn't going to be the same as it was back then. I think a lot of folks were kind of looking forward to and curious to see what Craig Kimbrel could offer the Braves. And the Braves' curiosity lasted exactly 1 inning, as he was called up on Friday, pitched an inning against the Giants, and was designated for assignment on Saturday morning. When I say this season has been baffling, and when I say this season has been frustrating, and when I say this season has been inexplicable, I really would think that calling up Craig Kimbrel just for the purpose of designating him for assignment after one game would go in that boat. And I'll get into that a lot more later. I do have thoughts about that. If you follow me on social media at Grant McAuley, you can probably go ahead and have a general idea of what I feel about that, because it's not as simple as, well, the Braves just let go of the answer to their bullpen mess. I'm not saying that, but I am very curious about the decision-making process that went into that, and of course, we'll talk about it on the show because we have 2 hours to do so. But as far as the club, I took a look inside the numbers for the record, for the pace, for the odds side of things to try to make sense of where they are and how they turn things around and what they're going to have to do if they want to get themselves into position to be vying for, I'm not just going to look at the National League East, because as the New York Mets sit with a 13-game lead over Atlanta right now, whether or not some crazy Yahoo media personality in New York declares the division over is irrelevant at this point. If the Braves want to get themselves into playoff contention in the wild card, they've got some pretty serious work to do, just based on what it looked like last year, even with the expanded postseason format. And I'll talk all about that as we go. But none of this stuff is going to happen unless the Braves are able to start hitting again. They aren't scoring runs on a consistent basis, and as we'll get into, their one big day at the plate went up in smoke because close games have been unkind to this Braves club. The bottom line, it continues to be the inability to hit with runners in scoring position and put up consistent run production in general. And until that changes, I don't see much that's going to be able to change in the one-loss department. That is where the Braves are at. But we'll dive into all of that in This Week in Braves Baseball. You will hear from Austin Riley, Alex Anthopoulos, and Eli White, who I had a chance to catch up with over at Truist Park this week. We will discuss the return of Fredi Gonzalez, the return and immediate dismissal of Craig Kimbrel, and much more. And I'll be joined by Anthony Castrovents for a trip around the big leagues. That will be coming up on this week's show. So we'll get into This Week in Braves Baseball as we continue on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond. Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer from Mark Spain Real Estate. 855-299-SOLD. On Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. Live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday morning as we close out the weekend and what has been a frustration thus far, this road trip for the Atlanta Braves, and a season of frustration for them as well. They're going to try to avoid a sweep in San Francisco, and then they have to face a Brewers team that has started to come to life as well. So this is not going to be a much easier run for the Braves. Brewers have won 8 out of 10. We'll talk about the rest of the road trip as we go along here on From the Diamond. As always, I want to remind you before we get too far into this and before we launch into This Week in Braves Baseball, of which I think we've set up pretty well thus far, that the conversation is going to be more of the unfun variety. But you can follow along with me on social media. Find me at Grant McAuley on most. Also subscribe to From the Diamond wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, you can find it on the Odyssey app where you'll find all of the great things that 92.9 The Game has going on. So I encourage you to download that and follow along there as well. Now, as far as what This Week in Braves Baseball was, it was a series of losses for this Atlanta club. As far as what it needs to be, well, I'm here to tell you, more consistent is the word for that. The futility in one-run games is the telling sign for this club. The Braves are 9-18 in one-run games this year. They have played by far the most one-run games in all of baseball with 27 of those. And the Braves' fate, I think, as you look at this, if you want to talk about the what-if of it all, could be altered by as little as 15, maybe 20 more runs over the course of the 63 games that they've played. If you could pick the night to add a couple to the tally, how much different it would look. Of course, baseball doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. But the Braves' margin for error has been so razor thin that they have found themselves as one of the two clubs in the National League with a positive run differential and a losing record. And that is not an easy thing to do. There's usually only a handful of clubs across Major League Baseball that find themselves in that boat. The Cincinnati Reds are the other one, in case you're wondering. They're 32-33 with a plus 36 run differential. The Braves, meanwhile, 9 games under 500 at 27-36 with a plus 4 run differential. You'll hear a little bit from Alex Anthopoulos a little bit later from when he talked to the media on Monday, which was precipitated by the coaching change that the Braves made at third base, bringing in Fredi Gonzalez, reassigning Matt Tuiasosopo to be a minor league infield coordinator for them. But he did talk about some of the other things, including the slow start for the Braves, the A.J. Smith-Shawver injury, the Marcell Ozuna injury deal that he is currently trying to play through, and much more. And we will get into that. But one of the things that Alex pointed to in terms of slow start and why he's not maybe as concerned as some is, he's looking at that run differential and thinking, okay, just like I said, winning clubs typically have a positive run differential. It's usually of the many indicators. But I do think you have to get inside these numbers and look a little bit more at what's not happening, and why are the Braves playing so many one-run games? And even if their run differential is positive, why that might be misleading. It's misleading because they're in the bottom third of the league in runs scored. That certainly doesn't help. For starters, as we've talked, as we will continue to build our entire case upon, you got to score more runs than the other guys if you want to win games on a regular basis. That is a thing that the Braves have struggled with at times, and particularly the streakiness that we're seeing here in a winless month of June so far. And, of course, all the way back to the first 2 series of the season when the Braves were swept out west by first the Padres, then the Dodgers. Braves aren't enjoying the state of California too much. You want to know one of the reasons they're 9 games under 500? Because they're 0-9 against the Padres, Dodgers, and Giants thus far this year. Now, you're not competing against the state of California, although it feels like it with the Dodgers that everybody's competing against maybe the state of California if you want to get through the National League, and maybe that is true. But in terms of the regular season, you got to do a whole lot more than that. But that's just one of the many stats inside of what the Braves have not been able to do this year. But yeah, as you look at this, a week that got off to an unexpected start with the return of Fredi Gonzalez, who, if you'll remember, in the middle of the rebuild, the Braves decided to change managers in May of 2016. Fredi Gonzalez was dismissed, and Brian Snitker was brought in. Snit had been in the organization for, what at that time, just over 40 years. Had been a third base coach at the major league level for Bobby Cox, for Fredi Gonzalez, I believe, even as well. And the two had quite a friendship. So that had to be a bit of a bittersweet circumstance because Fredi, while nobody ever wants to lose their job, is not going to begrudge Brian Snitker for getting an opportunity with a lifetime of service in the game to finally become a major league manager. It was kind of, one of those feel-good stories, if you will, to see Brian Snitker, the lifer, get that opportunity and then do what the Braves have done over the last 7 years, going to the playoffs and winning the World Series in 2021 and all those things. But some of those memories and some of those highs feel so far away from the Braves right now because even though they've won in the regular season in 22 and 23, to a lesser extent in 24, they've gotten to the postseason all those times, and they've been bounced twice by the Phillies and once by the Padres. So obviously the, sense of urgency to win in October again, the desire flat out to win in October, I mean, that's what it's all about, right? Winning in the postseason, winning championships. And the Braves seem to have a roster to do that, so why can't they seem to put those pieces together? Who is to blame for this, the last year and a half, that the Braves have been suffering through, especially offensively? Because you've already dismissed one hitting coach, and it was the hitting coach that was presiding over that 2023 club that seemingly couldn't do anything wrong until it forgot how to hit in the 2023 playoffs. But then 2024 was this crazy role reversal, this course correction. And I don't know how to explain what isn't working right now or why it's not working, but I think we all know what is not working. That's the order I want to say that in. But with this whole coaching change at the start of the week, you might have thought that was going to be the one big story, but it took a backseat relatively quickly because it's been another tough week for the club between the lines as they are winless in June thus far. And these losses come in all shapes and sizes. But what happened on Thursday afternoon was by far the worst of the bunch for the Braves. They scored 10 runs. They were up 6 runs with 2 outs to get in the 9th inning and lost 11-10 to the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, we're not here to do an autopsy of that game, but as you may have already heard, the note about how infrequent it is to be up by 6 or more through 8 innings and lose a game, the Braves hadn't done that since 1973. And Willie Mays had the game-winning hit for the Mets that day. Yeah, Willie Mays played for the Mets. Many of you may have known that. Some of you may not have. But that was a thing. The fact that Willie Mays was involved in the game, and so was Hank Aaron for that matter, just lets you know how long it's been. 52 years. 766 times the Braves took a 6-run lead to the 9th inning or more, 6 or more runs, and they hadn't lost a game until Thursday. And that is just kind of a microcosm of what the Braves season has been at its worst. I said on social media, that feels like rock bottom. If we're looking for it, I think we found it. And maybe rock bottom is less of just a singular place and more of a holding area that you just continue to explore and decide and find out exactly how much worse it can get, because it has gotten worse for the Braves since then, as they lost on a wild pitch on Friday night. And then on Saturday, you get the game of his life from Bryce Elder, needing to have somebody step up. Bryce Elder says, I'm going to step up. He does it. 8 innings of 1-run ball with a career-high 12 strikeouts. You take a 2-1 lead to the 9th and lose on a walk-off homer. And both of those games, Friday and Saturday, you didn't use the guy who's supposed to be your closer, because I think they've reached the point at this point, and it wasn't too long ago, I was thinking, it's got to turn around for Marcell Ozuna, right? Wrong. It has not. It may still. I don't know. But you can't keep running him out there in close games. Now, I said this the other day, and I don't know why. I mean, certain people, I guess, look at it certain different ways, but Marcell Ozuna never should have pitched in the game on Thursday. You win as a team, you lose as a team, and he certainly played a part in losing the game by being the guy who gave up the go-ahead runs. And he has most definitely been inconsistent this year to the point where he's become unreliable, and you just can't afford to have a liability trying to get the final 3 outs when you basically have 1 run to work with day after day after day after day after day as far as the lead is concerned. Now, Marcell went from a 1.94 ERA a year ago to a 6.75 ERA this year. And even though he started to keep the ball in the ballpark now, he's still giving up hits, and he's still giving up runs. And I think at this point you just have to kind of hit the reset button there and give him some time to pitch in some different situations and hopefully get himself righted. His strikeout rate, his walk rate are pretty much what they were a year ago. That would lead me to believe that he's doing a lot of the same things. But he's had to scrap his slider because it's been getting deposited over the wall too often this year. And now he's just trying to work a different way. And that might take time. And taking time to do it for a guy that you're counting on to be the most reliable part of your bullpen, basically, when you had a lot of other pieces that needed to, I think, be figured out this year, to put it kindly, you couldn't afford this Marcell Ozuna thing, and this is exactly what's happened. You want to look at a 9-18 record in 1-run games? Look at a struggling closer who's blowing saves and losing games as well. And again, if you score more runs, maybe some of these are different. But there's no way around the struggles of Marcell Ozuna, and I just don't think the Braves can afford to send him out there in the 9th inning time after time after time to get him right. They're going to have to reset this a little bit and give him the opportunity to at least clear his head and then get back to work, because he's going to have to play an important role, I believe, before this year is over. But in the flurry of bullpen moves after that game, the 11-10 game in which the Braves gave up 7 runs in the 9th inning, Craig Kimbrel was called up from AAA Gwinnett. And that return, I think folks had been at least curious about, if not anticipating, because, hey, it's Craig Kimbrel. If you ever saw what he did in a Braves uniform, clearly you might be invested in wanting to see if that guy still got it. And I think that was really the question about Craig Kimbrel and really the storyline for when he signed that minor league deal in spring training. Does he still have it? Are we going to find out? Can he help the big league club? And then as the bullpen started to become more and more and more unstable, I think the curiosity, I guess, got the best of the Braves, at least for 24 hours it did, because they called him up, and this return was ill-fated. He joined the club in San Francisco. did Kimbrel. He pitched on Friday night. It wasn't a very sharp inning. He was basically throwing 91, 92 miles an hour, which is 5-6 miles an hour off of what he's been able to throw throughout the majority of his career, in his heyday certainly, and just didn't seem to be consistent. But I will say this, it was one outing. Was that really all it took? Because I'm of the opinion, if you were just going to cut him after one game, and you weren't convinced it could help you to begin with, why even go through this exercise? Just call up Austin Cox to begin with, and let Craig Kimbrel continue to work down in AAA, because if you were this unenthused about what you saw, it wasn't any different than what he was doing in the minors for the most part. I've looked at his velocities and I followed along with that, and it didn't seem like this was anything to be unexpected about the Craig Kimbrel experience thus far. And look, the fact that we're having to spend a lot of time talking about what would amount to kind of a smoke and mirrors routine from a once dominant closer to maybe possibly perhaps help you out in the bullpen, that says everything you need to know about the state of the bullpen. And it's not because Pierce Johnson and Dylan Lee and Baseball Hernandez, who's now on the injured list, that was also in the flurry of moves this week. It's not because they don't have anybody that can get outs. It's because they don't have enough guys that can consistently get the outs, because they lost Joe Jimenez, because they don't have A.J. Minter anymore, and because some of the pieces that you brought in to help out just haven't been able to, I think, take those roles and run with it. I mean, it's difficult to find good help in the bullpen, and I'm sure that if the Braves are in a place where they need some, Alex Anthopoulos is going to go try to find it at the trade deadline. And he's done it before. He's rebuilt the bullpen before, but where in the world are the Braves going to be at the trade deadline? I mean, honestly, in 6 or 7 weeks, given the way that things have been trending right now, you got to have that sinking feeling in your stomach about how much worse can this thing get. And losing the one-run games and having the bullpen be a part of that, sure. I'm going to point to the offense, though, every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And the guys that I talked to over the past few weeks and really the past season, they're all aware. They got to score more. They got to do more in situations where they have the opportunities to break a game open, because when they don't, and this is happening time and time and time again, you're finding out that those opportunities that go by the wayside are the ones that are costing you the game. Loading the bases with nobody out, scoring one run or no runs. Getting guys second and third and not scoring a run with nobody out in an inning. It's not going to be perfect. And it's not a video game. Like, you're not able to just force the result. But whatever it is for the Braves that's not working about their process, not working about the results that are generated from it, they're going to have to figure out a way to adjust it. That's for sure. The bullpen barely holding it together, though. The stress on them is compounded by the lack of run support. It's their job, but every game can't play out this way, can it? I guess that's a rhetorical question about the Braves here. We got a lot of other things that we're going to talk about as we continue on From the Diamond with This Week in Braves Baseball. Unfortunately, not a lot of it is good. A lot of it is quite frustrating, because that has been the story of the Braves season thus far. So when we get back, we'll talk a little bit about the starting rotation, the injury for A.J. Smith-Shawver, the Spencer Strider experience thus far this year, which has been anything but what I'm sure Spencer Strider and others wanted. And we'll hear from Austin Riley and Eli White, who I caught up with this week at Truist Park, for a little chat about what's going on with the Braves individually and collectively here in 2025 as they try to turn their season around. This is From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Now, back to more From the Diamond. From the Diamond is brought to you by Window Nation. Get 2 windows free with every 2 you buy and pay nothing for 2 years. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
This is From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios as we continue discussing, dissecting, if you will, this week in Braves baseball, because goodness knows, trying to figure out the make heads or tails of things, or what exactly this club is going to need to do to turn it around, is easier asked and more difficult to find that answer to, that's for sure. I want to talk a little bit about the rotation for a moment, because in addition to all the other news that was going on, the comings and goings, in some cases both, for certain members of the Braves this year, or this week rather, it's the end of the year for A.J. Smith-Shawver, who's going to be having season-ending surgery on his right elbow. They're going to find out if he needs Tommy John or the UCL brace like Spencer Strider had a year ago once they get in and open him up. So the imaging was kind of inconclusive, I guess, and they're going to try to figure that out. Now, the difference in return times, typically Tommy John is, I think, about 16 months at this point, whereas the UCL brace can be right around a year. And that's where Spencer, of course, in terms of his comeback to the Braves, a little bit over a year. But for A.J. Smith-Shawver, I mean, it's nothing short of a disappointment when you had the opportunity to come in and carve out a role, and it seemed like he was kind of running with it for the time being. He made 9 starts this year, finished with a 3.86 ERA start, certainly not his best, but prior to that, he had looked pretty sharp. And hopefully he'll be able to get back to the Braves and perhaps maybe be a factor in the second half next year, but that remains to be a speedy recovery, as speedy as this kind of thing can be, to A.J. Smith-Shawver. Now that created an opportunity that we saw on Saturday could be taken by Bryce Elder. Who ran with it. And Bryce has had a couple of good starts since he came back up. I know he gave up the 3 runs against the Red Sox early in that start, first one back from Gwinnett, but that was it. He was able to pitch into the 6th inning again, able to keep the Braves in a ball game, and he did that and then some on Sunday. It was an absolutely tremendous and much-needed appearance by Bryce Elder. I think best start of his young career. 8 innings, 1 run on 3 hits, no walks, and 12 strikeouts. Gave up 1 solo homer. That came to Wilmer Flores. That the Giants were able to scratch across in the first 8 innings. Unfortunately, they had another homer up their sleeve against Pierce Johnson in the 9th inning and walked off to seal the series. And now the Braves find themselves, once again, trying to avoid a sweep, trying momentum, and trying to find the answers in what has continued to be problems in one-run games. That's 4 consecutive games decided by 1 run for the Braves. Those have gone in the loss column as they have lost the first 6 games of the month of June. None of this, obviously, is ideal. But I did have a chance at Truist Park this week to catch up with a couple of Braves and just kind of discuss what's going on. And as we talked about the struggles of the offense, I wanted to get the inside perspective in here through the highs and the lows for this club, and sometimes the lows that were right before those highs. So I chatted with Braves third baseman Austin Riley a few days ago, trying to get a little bit of insight on, look, if this club feels like it's time to have one of those closed-door meetings, what is the criteria for that? And, of course, what exactly the Braves can do to get themselves back on track offensively. This is individually and collectively with runners in scoring position. Here's my chat with Braves third baseman Austin Riley.
A big part of that 22 team, a big part of that was the closed-door meeting that you guys have. And you know the context of these things and what goes into that kind of deal. How do you decide, I guess, as a group or individually and then collectively when it's time to maybe just all circle and...
You know, our pitching's been good. So, it's the hitting, and we've had conversations in our hitters meeting of how, how do we just kind of relax a little bit and so, like I said, that gut feeling will tell you that. But like I said, our pitching's been good, so it's all on our, us hitters. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, just you got to. The biggest thing that I'm seeing is just when you're in the box, guys are in scoring position. Obviously you hadn't got it done. It's in your mind, and I think you're seeing that guys are wanting to do it more than anything, and just not getting their pitch. And I think just be a little bit more, just a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more patient in the box. I try to get in a spot where I partially think like, hey, it's just me and the pitcher out there. Nobody's on the bag. Let's just have a good at bat. Whatever happens, let's just put a barrel on a ball, and after that, you can't control it. And that seemed to have helped some. Yeah.
Consistency goes into the work that you guys put into it. So clearly that part is there.
Yeah.
Is it just and I've talked to you a lot, I've talked to other guys a lot about it. It feels like that part really never wavers. The results, of course, may vary, and the opposition plays a role in that. Do you feel like they're attacking you guys differently than years past?
So they brought a stat to us yesterday. It was like 0 counts. And I can't remember correctly if it's like slugging or I think it may be average. Like we're like 23rd in the league, but then 1 counts we're like 6th in the league, and then 1-0 counts we're like back to like down to 20th. So I think guys are just maybe being a little, like I said, 0-0, 1-0, too careful. And like I said, to me nowadays there's no hitters count.
Right.
So I think it's just like fine tuning a little bit of that approach side of just like, hey, I'm gonna be uber aggressive, but also controlled, and try not to, at the same time, you're trying to, name of the game as a starting pitcher to get the pitch count up. So you're trying to see pitches, and I feel like they're attacking us a little bit more early. So I think, like I said, just let's be a little bit more aggressive. We, myself included, missing some fastballs. So it's like, let's get it back on the fastball, on the attack. and trust our eyes to check off one of those.
I imagine you go back and look at some of those, and it's like, there it was.
Yeah, like last night, my last at bat, it's like I missed a couple fastballs right down the middle. I think I hit his best pitch for a base hit. It's like, I got a hit, but at the same time, it's like, let's not miss those fastballs when I get them.
That might be the simplest way to summarize. Let's not miss our hittable pitches when we have them. And it has felt like a lot of that Austin Riley was talking about has been true of not just him, but of the team. When you talk about being in the lower third in the league as far as hitting in 0-0 counts, I mean, that's one of the many things that you can look inside the numbers and say, okay, do we need to change our approach? Because that, I think I've been asked about a lot, is how can they change their approach? Well, you can go up hunting early, which I think was really a hallmark of the 2023 team. And I'd have to go through and really dig the stats out and see how much different it is now. But clearly they've noticed a trend. And if it's made it to the Braves hitters meetings and they are discussing, okay, well, how can we maybe take advantage of earlier counts and do damage before we're in the 0-1, 0-2, 1-2. On Austin said there may not be as much of a traditional hitters count anymore just because of the way the game has evolved. The guys throw harder. There's, more spin than ever, all those kinds of things. But there are, I think, more advantageous counts where maybe things are a little bit more level. And I think you could start there and just try to reverse engineer this thing and maybe put together some better at-bats. But that's just the insight of one of the Braves' better hitters and one of the guys that's seen it, I think, at the lowest that it's been over the past couple of years and also the highest of highs and what clutch hitting can do for a team, particularly if you're able to get on a run and remain hot through the month of October. Now, Austin Riley, we always expect big things from each and every year. That's why he is who he is. One of the guys who's been helping the Braves out and playing, I think, an important role in trying to stabilize the outfield mix, particularly before Ronald Acuna Jr. got back, was Eli White. The veteran, fourth, fifth outfielder for the most part, pressed into some pretty regular duty this year, and I think he's played, like I said, an important role in trying to keep things going for the Braves. I got a chance to chat with Eli at Truist Park this week, and I invite you to take a listen to that.
Ask you a little bit about your season. I mean, obviously, coming into camp, you kind of look at it as a new opportunity, trying to see where you're going to fit and the goals to make the big league club. Now, as you kind of reflect on the last couple of months, what has this ride been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing. Yeah, like you said, goal coming into camp was just to make the team and prove value and try and help the team where I can, and was able to get some opportunity to play there for a little while, and felt like I did a good job, and it was fun to get those opportunities and help the team where I can, and whatever my role looks like going forward, I'll be ready to go and ready to help the team.
You bring a lot of versatility in a number of different ways. You can run, you can play the outfield, you can play the infield, and all of those are things that could help you find those opportunities. What has the process been like to kind of stay ready for whatever you're asked to do?
Yeah, there's a lot of different situations, whether that's pinch running, pinch hit, defensive replacement, whatever. So there's a lot. And then playing the infield as well, having versatility is something that I've always felt like could be a skill set for me. And so I was thankful and happy that going into spring training, they wanted to see me play infield, and I was able to show that I could do that. If it shakes out and they need me in that situation for whatever reason. But it takes a lot of work, taking ground balls, staying on top of the outfield, and then just mentally just being prepared and trying to stay sharp on the bench, when I'm in that role, to, play situations out when I might get my name called and stuff like that, to be ready.
When you go into an off season and you're looking for ways to improve and change and whatnot, what kind of things are you kind of focused on? I guess maybe taking what you learned from the previous year and seeing where you can implement those changes. I know a lot of guys spend a lot of time on their swing. Obviously, you want to be ready in that regard. Anything that you uncovered over the winter that kind of helped you to find some of the success that you've enjoyed this year?
Well, I think it's been a few years coming. Stuff I've been working on with my swing, and felt like I had a great season last year in AAA and limited opportunities up here. And so a lot of it was just kind of looking back at what I did well and trying to improve on those things. And a lot of work on my swing. And then always, like, speed's a skill set of mine, and so I'm always working on speed and agility and trying to get faster and making sure that my legs are healthy going into a long season, that I can help the team in that way for the long season.
Talk to me a little bit about the torpedo bat. Is that something that you're still using? When did it get on your radar? Yeah. And what has that been like from, I guess, years of using what I guess you'd call a traditional bat to something that's maybe a little bit new and a little bit innovative?
Yeah, so it was, something that Calvin, our head clubby, when everything broke at the beginning of the season about the Yankees using torpedo bat and all that, he asked who would want to try some, and he ended up ordering guys some. And yeah, it was just something I wasn't really playing much at the time, so I had a few days to swing with it, and I just liked how it felt. I didn't really have a bunch of data on whether I'd actually swung it better or was hitting the ball harder necessarily, but I just liked the way it felt, and had a little bit of a bigger barrel than the bat I've been swinging, but it felt a little lighter, so I felt like that could only be a good thing. So yeah, I'm still using it, and it's just, I wouldn't say it's like a fix-all for sure. It's still a bat, but definitely can be a tool, and I think it's been helpful for me.
Yeah, and always looking for ways to find those little things that can help you along the way in a long season. Speaking of which, for the Braves, obviously the expectations coming into the year, they remain the same, even if the results haven't been what you guys have wanted thus far. How is the general feeling, I guess, and the vibe of this clubhouse as you've kind of had to go through some highs and lows thus far this year? You know you've got a decent amount of the season left, but I'm imagining as the days tick off the calendar, you start to feel a little bit of urgency as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we feel urgency every time we come to the field, and that's what's good about this group, and that's why I feel like this group is going to finish really strong, is everybody's always coming in ready to work and takes it one day at a time. And like you said, the results haven't been exactly what we wanted to this point, but everybody's working hard, and things, we're getting our team back, and guys are healthy, and so we're gonna get this thing turned around and get it back on track.
I know there's only so much you can do individually. Collectively, it kind of has to all add up to what you guys want it to, but you still see the dedication, the work, the things that go into turning this kind of thing around, even if this has been going on for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, guys, this group is a bunch of hard workers and guys that want to win, and so everybody shows up every day looking to win that day and what they need to do individually to collectively win. And so it's also very guys like that fun, and guys, there's not super highs, super lows with this team, even when things are going not great. Guys are staying even, staying positive, and I think that's really important because things can spiral quickly, but this team isn't like that. So everybody stays even-keeled and comes to work every day and ready to go.
Thanks, Braves outfielder Eli White. Appreciate the time. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Grant.
Great to catch up with Eli White this week. He has, again, kind of stepped in where the Braves needed him to, and they've had to call upon a few different pieces to fill those voids, if you will. And now with Ronald Acuna Jr. back, maybe he can help out some in left field where the Braves' numbers are just not what they need to be, and we'll see how exactly they want to approach that, because at some point here in a little less than a month, they're going to have the Jerks and Profar discussion, but that is not one that we have to have today. But if you told me that Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to come back and the Braves are immediately going to go 3-11 after basically climbing to above 500 right before he got back, I would have made you show me the math. And now looking at the math, looking at the scores of these games, it continues to be one of the most confounding and frustrating things about this club. But I think we all knew one guy walking through the door wasn't going to change this entire thing. When we come back, we will hear some from Braves General Manager Alex Anthopoulos, who spoke to the media earlier this week on a variety of topics, and continue our discussion of what's going on with the Atlanta Braves, and more importantly, how in the world do they fix it? It comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond. Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer from Mark Spain Real Estate, 855-299-SOLD. On Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
This is From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We begin hour 2 of the program. I want to remind you, as always, you can follow me on social media at Grant McAuley on most platforms. You can also subscribe to From the Diamond wherever you get your podcast. You can also find it on the Odyssey app. All you got to do is search for From the Diamond. It can't get much easier than that. Now, if you are following me on social media, then you know much of the discourse this year has been about the Braves' inability to score runs and what it has cost them and what it has pushed them into. And that would be an exorbitant amount of one-run games. So I got curious. What does the one-run game tell us about the Braves over the past, I'm going to say 3 seasons plus this one? So we went back to 2021. Something good happened there. We all sort of remember, but it doesn't feel like it right now. But then 2022, where they won 100 games after a slow start. 2023, where they dominated pretty much across the board for 6 months. And then 2024. I want to go back and look at each one of those. And so I guess then adding in this year makes 5. But the last 4 years and this one. Nice little 5-year sample size for us here, because one-run failure right now is haunting the Braves. As I mentioned earlier in the show, and I'm sure you've seen this just floating out there on social media in the ether and otherwise, 9-18 in one-run games. And I kept looking at that and thinking, wow, that is a lot of one-run games. In fact, it is. It is 27 of their first 63 games that have been decided by one run. They have lost 18 of those, including 9 one-run losses in a row. So of the last 9 games decided by one single run, the Braves have lost every single one of those, and they also have a 4-game losing streak inside their 6-game losing streak, in which they have lost the last 4 games by one run, heading into Sunday's finale against the San Francisco Giants. So if you're wondering, 27 out of 63, what's that put the Braves on pace for in one-run games this year? Well, you may not be wondering, but the answer is 70. 70 one-run games in a 162-game season. If that sounds like a lot, it's because it is. The Braves had 43 one-run games last year. They had 41 of those in 2023. They had 44 of them in 2022. And then you get to 2021, it gets a little more interesting. The Braves had 57 one-run games there, and they were terrible in one-run games. Not as bad as they are here, but a winning percentage just over 400 in their 57 one-run games back in 2021. So what does this stat tell us ultimately? Not a lot, other than you can see how the Braves are coming up short in games that I would say are winnable in many games. A one-run game is a winnable game by definition. If it's decided by just a single run, you had a chance that day, that night, whatever. That the Braves have not been able to get it done in one-run games, especially lately in 9-18, the 27 one-run games, by far the most in all of baseball this year. And the number one cause of that is the offensive futility, period. You look at runners in scoring position, the Braves are 24th in Major League Baseball in runs scored in those situations, 24th, I believe, as well in home runs in that situation. And again, a home run doesn't have to be the only outcome, but man, it sure would be nice for a club that hasn't hit a 3-run homer since April the 23rd. They got 4 3-run homers this year. It's been 39 games since the Braves hit a 3-run homer, and they don't have a grand slam this year. So when the Braves are doing their maximum amount of damage, basically nobody's on base. It's some 2-run shots and a lot of solos. And that is another thing that feeds into not having enough runs on the board to avoid one-run games, which have been the Achilles heel of the Braves thus far this year. But, I mean, the question continues, and it's asked by us. It's asked by every single show. It's asked of Brian Snitker, of Alex Anthopoulos, of individual players. You heard me talk to Austin Riley about it earlier. What can be done? Well, Alex Anthopoulos met with the media on Monday, and I do want to stipulate this was before the meltdown on Thursday, before the Braves were swept by the Arizona Diamondbacks and lost the first 2 games of the San Francisco Giants. So just for context and for tone, this was Alex Anthopoulos when discussing the Braves' struggles with runners in scoring position. Take a listen to the Atlanta GM.
I don't want to necessarily speculate. I don't, if I say, hey, it's this thing now, the focus becomes on that. Look, we haven't gotten the job done. There's no doubt. I think coming off the high of 23, even if there's a regression, you don't think it's to the extreme that we have now. Look, we're looking at all kinds of things. We're working through things. We clearly have not been able to solve it as a group. That's players, coaches, front office. For me to give you anything more and speculate, I just don't think it'd be responsible. I wish I could tell you, look, here, this is it. You're going to see it start tomorrow night. I think you ultimately believe in the group. And I know we can get hot. I know things can turn. And look, we've been through, like I said, this is my 8th season here. 21's a great example. It was doom and gloom for a long time. And I didn't project it to be August that we would finally catch fire and go for the next 2 months. But look, we've seen guys have great first halves, fall off in the second half. We've seen guys do the opposite. Eddie Rosario and Jorge Soler had miserable first halves with their clubs. They were tremendous for us. Even Harris last year at the end of the year. So we're going to have to ultimately look at the aggregate and the 6 months over time. But look, we don't want guys to be streaky. We want consistency. We want great performance. Of course, we want to win every game. and we're working at it. But if I could pinpoint one thing, it would have been addressed and we would have it solved.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, you're on your second hitting coach trying to solve this, what has been, again, dating back to last May, an offense that despite its talents, despite having some of the better players that this club has ever had collectively all at one time, offensively speaking on their profiles, not been able to put runs up on the board consistently and ranks 21st in Major League Baseball over the last 13-plus months now in runs scored. That's just not something I thought I'd be talking about after watching 2023. And I want to be clear. Not every year is going to be like 2023, as I said earlier, but even if you account for, as Alex talked about there, some regression, you don't expect for it to strike this hard and to this extent, and that is one of the more confounding things about the way that this has been playing out thus far. Now, inside of that, inside of this Braves lineup, the struggles by individual players, some of the injuries to players last year, I think you could have looked at that, and it was fair to say that sapped the Braves of some of the thump in the lineup. But they haven't been dealing with that in the same ways this year. If anything, you were thinking, wow, we're going to get a surge because Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to come back. And all Ronald has done thus far is come in and hit .321 with a .400 on base and a nearly 1,000 OPS. He's got 4 homers. He scored 9 runs in 14 games. He's done the things that he's supposed to do at the top of the order. And the Braves are 3-11 over that stretch. And it's not because of Ronald Acuna Jr. doing or not doing something. He's supposed to make the team better. He does make the team better. But the runners in scoring position problem that the Braves have run into here that goes far beyond just one hitter, no matter who that hitter is, you would think by getting a little bit more at leadoff that it would help out in that regard. But you look around the Braves outfield, I mean, in center, Michael Harris is immaculate in the field. At the plate, this has been one of the more frustrating campaigns for him, and unlike the last couple of years, it hasn't been because he's missed time due to injury. It's really just been more of trying to find consistency at the plate. I talked to Michael for a couple of minutes on the recent homestand as well and asked him, what really, at this point of the year, does your mindset start to go through? Is there more urgency? Does that start to kind of make you press a little bit more? And he said, no, honestly, I feel like when I'm not thinking about it, I have my best at bats. And that's probably the most honest assessment. When you don't have to think about something, it just happens. You're just able to do it. It's just who you are and what you're capable of. That's the easiest place to be in the world. It's the best place to be in the world, and that speaks to the talent that they have. But the working, the grinding, the adjusting, all of those things, that's the hard part. That's where the hitting coaches earn their money. That's where really front offices and coaching staffs in general, I think you want to see them separate themselves because you want to find these answers faster than the Braves are. So it is fair to wonder about who's responsible for it. But the ultimate answer, and I think it's in this order, is the players' individual performance, which will then add up to their collective performance, offensively speaking, is not what the Braves need. And I don't think there's anything that Brian Snitker or Tim Hires or Kevin Seitzer before him or Alex Anthopoulos right now can say to individual hitters and players to make them do better than they already want to do themselves. And that's why I really appreciated Austin Riley kind of walking me through his mindset a little bit earlier in the show. So if you missed that, you can find From the Diamond wherever you get your podcast, so make sure you go back and listen to that. Also, in the Odyssey app, if you just want to rewind. I talked about that just before the top of the hour. But in the midst of everything that's going on, I told you injury wasn't as big a problem this year, but we have started to see the first thing that might affect at least one Braves player for the rest of the year, and it's been the Braves' most consistent hitter year over year, and that's Marcell Ozuna. Ozuna revealed, I believe it was about 10 days ago, that he's been dealing with what he called a tear in his hip. You remember he missed that series in mid-April in Toronto, and the Braves sent him back to Atlanta. He got some imaging done, and they basically decided at that point, all right, there is an issue with the hip. It's not going to heal itself automatically, but can you play with it? Can you play through it? That's what Ozuna wanted to do. Ultimately, I think this is something that surgery is probably going to have to fix, but Marcell doesn't want to just call it a year. So I asked Alex Anthopoulos to discuss a little bit about what Marcell Ozuna is going through and how exactly the Braves view this hip injury for their all-star DH. Take a listen.
It's going to be a factor the entire year, but Marcell's tough. He's playing through it. He's still performing, but there's no doubt he's playing through it. And even when we took him out and we got tests and so on, he didn't want to do it. So he wants to stay in there. He's a very durable player. He's still a productive player, but it's one of those things that he's going to have to manage and get to the offseason. So we've told him, look, at times be careful with, don't try to run as fast as you can down to first base. Be judicious on the base pass and so on. So if you see him at some, a routine ground ball, he might be saving his bullets from that standpoint. But he expects to be in there. He expects to play every day, and it's tolerable enough to continue for him to continue to play. It's a little bit. I'm not saying it's the same circumstance, but we didn't realize. Joe Jimenez pitched through a lot of stuff, and he pitched at a high level, and he was great. We don't make the postseason without his contributions. There's no doubt about it. So I think some of you really respect and admire those guys, but it's something that he was adamant about and he wants to do, and he's still his OPS is in the high to mid eights, and his numbers are still phenomenal.
And you need Marcell Ozuna. I don't think there's any two ways about it. Now, as you start to think about the trade deadline, which I think is still way too early to decide what exactly you're going to do there, I know a lot of people have said, well, you just trade him and plug Drake Baldwin in there. Would it be good to get Drake Baldwin more bats? Yes. But I also feel like in some cases, when you start to erode from the depth that you have, and look, depth is the goalposts are moving on that discussion for the Braves in a number of different ways. They're a better team with Marcell Ozuna than without. Now, are they a good enough team to get to October with Marcell Ozuna? Again, jury's out on that one, and the Braves are going to have to start playing a much better brand of baseball in the not-too-distant future. But even if you do trade him, I don't think you're going to get very much for him. I don't think you were going to get a ton for him on an expiring contract before the hip issue. Now I think teams would be happy to take him if there's really no risk involved whatsoever in doing so. So I don't think he's going to get a big return, and it's going to be interesting to see how this affects Marcell's winter as he heads into free agency. But the fact that that guy is saying, I would rather play through it than get a surgery now and think about where I'm going to sign next year, I think tells you a lot about the teammate that Marcell Ozuna is. So props to him for that and for being a tough guy to play through. This is not just, well, I'm a little banged up. There's a definite injury that needs to be handled, and hopefully at some point he'll be able to do that, and he'll be able to play through this. The Braves, though, are going to have to monitor this pain level the rest of the way and figure it out as it goes. But they're going to need to get more production. I looked at left field because we talked about Michael Harris having such a tough offensive season in center. Obviously, Ron Acuna Jr. is back, so maybe don't worry about right field anymore because you've got one of the best players in the game there. But Braves left fielders this year are batting .238 with 2 home runs. That is some of the worst production in all of baseball. But if you want to feel a little bit better about it, which I'm sure you do in some way, shape, or form, Dodgers left fielders are batting .173 with 3 home runs. They've just got some other things that are going really well for them right now. But be that as it may, those are a few more things going on with the Atlanta Braves. When we come back, we're going to take a quick trip around the big leagues. I'll be joined by Anthony Castrovents of MLB.com to discuss a few fun topics that come your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Taking a look around the league with more of our From the Diamond with Grant McAuley. From the Diamond is brought to you by Window Nation. Get 2 windows free with every 2 you buy and pay nothing for 2 years on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios in Midtown. We continue our trip around the big leagues, and it is my pleasure to welcome Anthony Castrovents of MLB.com into the show. You can follow him on social media at Castrovents, and you can find his work at MLB.com. Really, really great stuff. It runs the gamut, and that is exactly what we're going to do here today. Anthony, thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I want to dive into something that we saw this week that I think overdue might be one way to put it, but intriguing is probably the way that everybody would describe it, and that is the ABS challenge system coming to a ballpark near you. We got a peek at this thing in spring training. It's been beta tested in the minor leagues, but MLB finally ready to embrace the technology and put it in the hands of its players. Where do you fall on this, and do you believe it's going to accomplish the goal of, I guess, improving the strike zone?
Yeah, it's been a long road to this point. They've been fine-tuning the quote-unquote robot umps for some time, and it's taken a while for the technology to be a place where they feel it's worthy of some sort of inclusion at the major league level. They've also tested it out in multiple forms in the minor leagues, and, I mean, it's hard to get people to get widespread agreement on anything, but there was very widespread agreement that the challenge system was superior to so-called full ABS, which would be, a robot calling the entire game. That really seemed to weigh the game down, more walks, and just not baseball-y. I mean, there's certain things we accept in our sport as just part of the game where an umpire strike zone is sometimes adjusted to just the situation. A 12-2 game is different than a 2-1 game, right? So I think there's just kind of a general practice that people in baseball accept, and the ABS does, when you're full robot umps, does not allow for that. So yeah, I think there's just kind of a general consensus that, look, if we're doing anything with ABS, it's going to be the challenge system. I, for one, really like it because I just like that it adds strategy to the game. You have to be very judicious with how you use your allotted challenges, within a game. And so you got to be a good team player. There's selfish moments to use it, but it might not be the best place in the game to use it. So you saw in the minor leagues, different teams would try different things. Some of them would have a rule like you can't do it in the first 5 innings. But of course, the highest leverage moment in a game might be in the first 5 innings. So it's kind of a touchy thing, but I love that element of it. But this whole thing is fascinating because, to me, like, the pitch clock was a no-brainer in that, like, it was a no-brainer that baseball had to speed up and they had to find a way to do that. This is a little more nuanced. It's like you're not necessarily solving a problem. I know in fans' eyes it's a big problem, but if you look at it statistically, the umpires are really good. In some argument that they're better than ever because stuff, it's faster than ever. There's more movement than ever. It's harder than ever to call balls and strikes behind the plate. I think we've seen from the data in the challenge system, like, this is not solving some major ills. It's the number of challenges per game in spring training and in AAA is like 2 per game. The overturn rate is roughly 50%. So you think about that. These are the most quote unquote controversial balls and strikes, right? And half of them are correct by the ump. So it's not like solving some major issue that the pitch clock did with pace, but it is something I think is worth doing.
Yeah, I am intrigued to see as they roll it out, will there be any adjustments to this? Will the challenges go up? Will they go down? Will, as you said, there be just strategy that teams employ that may mitigate the effect that many people might be expecting out of this? I know that the fans and myself, I've grown up watching baseball, and I can see that, well, that's a call that changes the at-bat because instead of being 2-0, now it's 1-1 and all of those different things. And I guess that's all kind of baked in to what they're looking to improve here, at least give the opportunity for a hitter or a pitcher to try to claim a pitch and a play and a call that could help them and maybe get them back in account, or in some ways, I guess, as we start to unpack and unwind everything, perhaps change the game. Where do you feel like the umpires are on this? Because as we see it get integrated, no one wants their calls to get overturned. You mentioned that the data, it was kind of a 50-50, so a toss-up, borderline, if you will, but I'm sure they don't want to see their decisions and calls overturned, especially if it were to be routinely, and no one wants to have their mistakes broadcast to the world as well. So how have they adopted to, or how have they, embraced the technology to come?
Well, it had to be negotiated with the umpires unions to even get to this point, So I think ultimately they come down on, wanting the biggest calls to be correct. They take great pride in what they do, and they should. It's an extremely difficult job. And you think about what has been put on the umpire's plate in recent years, with the new rules and everything that goes into just enforcing that over the course of the game. They have so much to be paying attention to now that goes well and beyond what they were initially trained, monitoring the defensive shifts in the infield, right? Keeping an eye on the pitch timer, keeping track of timeouts and all that stuff. So I think ultimately there's just a feeling like, all right, let's get the calls right. I don't think they want to cede their job behind the plate to a robot, and this is not forcing them to do that. This is just, like I said, the quote unquote biggest calls and conceivably the biggest moments, much like the replay review system. But I look at the data and I'm like, it gives me more appreciation for what these guys do. So I think we've been spoiled by these broadcasts that have the strike zone. Now, it's important to understand that the strike zone on the regional Braves broadcast versus the ESPN broadcast versus, it changes from broadcast to broadcast. It's not always accurate to what the umpires are actually being graded on. And it's easy for us to sit on our couches and to judge these guys, but it's a very difficult job. And again, to me, the proof is in the overturn rate. When you look at AAA last year, the overturn percentage on these ABS calls was 50.6%. In spring training in the big leagues this year, 52.2%. So, half the time they were right on the absolute most difficult calls. So they do a really good job. And I think that needs to be kind of an overarching theme, is like, we're not necessarily solving a major problem here. It's just a matter of having these high leverage moments, making sure that they're done correctly.
Yeah, some incremental improvement to the game, the evolution of the game, if you will. And am I hearing right that not every hitter has the eye of Barry Bonds and every pitcher have the precision of Greg Maddux? So maybe there is something to be said for the human element, for that matter, being a factor. And you brought up the strike zone boxes that we see on television, and I'd always felt like they were different. And then I think it was a year or two ago, I saw somebody overlay the different national broadcast boxes over one of the regional ones, and it might have even been the Braves one. And I thought to myself, wow, that would really change the way that my perception as a viewer would be about the strike zone. But I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to step out of the box. I'm going to call my one timeout and stop with the ABS here and move on to something that I think is extremely important across baseball as we chat with Anthony Castrovents of MLB.com about the week that was in MLB. Some big news for the strike zone, but something else I feel like is always worth a good focus is Lou Gehrig Day, 5th annual one across Major League Baseball, honoring the legacy of the Hall of Famer, his battle with the disease, raising awareness and funds, of course, to fight ALS. You wrote a great piece about Lou Gehrig's final years with a focus on his last season and how he battled the beginning stages of ALS throughout that. Can you walk us through what you found out about that 1938 campaign and, in hindsight, why it was so much more significant than anybody could have realized at the time?
Yeah, in 1938, well, the year before, you still have peak caliber Lou Gehrig. And then the next season was kind of this weird thing. He was actually filming a movie before spring training, and then there's some reporting that, maybe he was showing signs of weakness while filming that movie. He shows up in spring training. He just doesn't have the same thump in his bat that he'd had before. And people are very much aware of this and reporting on this, and he's aware of it and discussing it and saying, the ball is just not rocketing off his bat like it had in the past. And he goes about the season and he has a slow start. Midway through the year, he actually goes on quite a run. He just gets hot and he goes on a tear. And so the Yankees go to the World Series, as they tend to do. And at the time, and Lou Gehrig has a few hits in the World Series, and that's his season. But what nobody could understand at the time is that very likely, from all the reporting and all the things he was saying about what's going on with his body and that kind of thing, like, he was playing with ALS. I think it's pretty solid footing to say that. And he hit 29 home runs. He hit 32 doubles. So at the time, it was looked upon as his worst full season. But I would make the argument that it's one of the most amazing things anyone's ever done, to have ALS beginning to rob your body of its vitality and to still have the season he had. And then, of course, the following year is 1939, and that's the year where, he finally has to take himself out of the lineup. He goes to the Mayo Clinic and, ultimately gets diagnosed with ALS, and that's the end of his career. But the decline really began the year before. Again, nobody really knew or understood what was going on with him. It was many decades before we, had a deeper understanding of ALS.
Yeah.
And to this day, there's no cure. And there's just so many awful things out there, cancers and whatnot. But, this is the worst disease. Yeah. It's underfunded. And it's one of those things where once you see it, you can't unsee it. Our dear friend at MLB, Sarah Langs, was diagnosed several years ago. And, and that's very unusual. A young woman in her 20s diagnosed with ALS. And this is just one of the greatest people I've ever known. Just one of the most sweetest, just smart, hard work. Like, everything about her is to the hilt. And to see her diagnosed and to watch her condition deteriorate in the last few years has only made me all the more motivated to do everything I can to get funding for this awful thing and treatments. And the bottom line is they just haven't made a lot of progress. There's been treatments that have come out, but it's just this incurable thing. It's brutal. It's terrible what it does to people and their families and the financial burden it can cause. So I'm so glad that MLB does this every year now, because it's only natural to have a Lou Gehrig Day. And I don't think there's any other sport that has a disease so closely associated with it. It's just the nature of it with, it's Lou Gehrig's disease and therefore it's baseball's disease. And I'm glad they've taken ownership of that.
No, I think that's a really, really great way to put it. And I'd echo everything you said about Sarah. Anyone who's followed her work for any amount of time knows her love for the game and obviously the understanding of how terrible this disease is. And to raise awareness, to raise funds, and to hopefully find a cure for this thing one day, that is a worthwhile goal for all of us to strive toward. I know this may not seem big in all of the talk about Lou Gehrig this week and obviously the focus on ALS, but I mean, I've looked at the greatest player debate as one of the most subjective debates that we'll ever have in baseball. There is no one right answer, but I almost feel like Gehrig's legacy has been defined so much so by ALS, by his early passing, by the consecutive game streak even, but prime Lou Gehrig, Anthony, I mean, he has as good an argument as anyone. Then you consider he had to do most of the work in his career batting after some guy named Babe Ruth was done clearing the bases. I mean, it's incredible to think about what he did and to look at those stats.
It's interesting because his career really exists in the shadow of Babe Ruth and in the shadow of ALS. But yeah, I mean, it certainly stands on its own. This guy was, country strong, as they say, and Babe Ruth changed the game with his power, and then Lou Gehrig, rode in just a few years later and put up power numbers that to this day define the position of first base. It's very easy to get lost in the storyline of him being the Babe's running mate, so to speak, and his sidekick, and also that he was felled by this awful disease that essentially bears his name now. But yeah, the numbers are pretty good.
Yeah, no, they absolutely are. Wrapping up here with Anthony Castrovents of MLB.com. Want to cover a little bit of something different here that we've seen. MLB taking a swing at professional softball. You've done some work on this story as well. Tell us a little bit about the AUSL, what we need to know about it, and what MLB is hoping to see from this venture.
Yeah, I went to the league's media day last week and got to know a lot of the players, and it really does get you invested in it because a player going into her college softball career, you think about a baseball player going in his college career, he can be thinking about, okay, I'm going to play 3 years here, and then I'm going to get drafted, and I'm going pro, and, that's my path. Whereas a softball player, it's like, okay, I'm going in, I'm going to play all 4 years, first of all, and then, I don't know, I mean, will this league that exists today, will it exist 4 years from now? There's been a couple of, very short-term, unfortunately, fly-by-night professional softball leagues. The Athletes Unlimited for the last 5 years has had this summer competition that, for a few weeks they play, and it's like this individualized competition. It's kind of interesting. Like you're playing on a team, but the points are individual. So that's kind of cool. But again, that's not like what you shoot for as a player going. So now this is something that, an incoming freshman in college who's good, this is something to potentially aim for because this feels a lot more stable because it has the backing of MLB. And this first season will be a little interesting. It's just 4 teams, and they're just traveling the country. None of them are tied to any city, but that'll change next year. But it's just a great thing to see because this is really blowing up. I mean, women's sports in general have really caught steam here of late, and softball in particular. The popularity of sport has really taken off, and is a good way to tap into it. And having that MLB backing gives it the legitimacy that it would not have otherwise had. And having Kim Ang, the former Marlins GM, be the commissioner, that was a big part of that. So it looks fun. I almost hate to say it. I'm a baseball writer, and baseball is my number one, but I can admit that softball is a better TV product. It's just more, there's more action. It's smaller field. There's more stuff happening. It's faster paced. So you can see where people would kind of gravitate towards it.
No, you definitely can. There is a lot to like about it. And to have that venue or have that venture and opportunity in front of you as a young, aspiring, high-level player to have a career after your collegiate days, that I think is something that makes sense for a lot of people and should be a lot of fun to see how this evolves. Anthony, appreciate all your time as always, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road as the 2025 season continues to roll on.
Absolutely, Grant. Thanks for having me, man.
He is Anthony Castrovents of MLB.com. Make sure you follow him on social at Castrovents. It is always a good time when I get to catch up with him. When we come back, though, we're going to have to talk about something that is not a good time, and that is what's going on with the 2025 Braves. Their playoff odds are getting longer and longer by the day. I'm going to go inside the numbers and tell you exactly where the Braves are at this point of the season and what they'll need to do to turn it around if they have any hopes of making it to October. That comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond. Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer from Mark Spain Real Estate, 855-299-SOLD on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back one more time to From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We're live from the Kia Studios on Sunday. Going to wrap up the show and finally get that trip inside the numbers I've been talking about. I've been putting it off, really, because it's not a whole lot of fun to look at. It wasn't a whole lot of fun to do this research, and I don't know that Braves fans out there are going to feel a lot better when I'm done, but it is just kind of the case or the space that the Braves find themselves operating out of right now, and that is not being able to win games that are, as I said earlier, are imminently winnable. That one-run game thing, that Achilles heel for this club, that has been a real problem this year, and they've got to figure out how to start, I don't know, just not just manufacturing runs, but their power has also been down. I talked about this earlier in the week. I mean, the Braves went from a club that hit 307 home runs a couple of years ago to a team that is on pace for right about 162, which would drop them into maybe middle-of-the-pack power production for a team. That is really not the hallmark of this lineup as designed, with Ronald Acuna Jr. and Matt Olson and Austin Riley and Marcell Ozuna and Ozzie Albies and Sean Murphy and so on and so forth. You would just expect that this is a club that's going to be able to flex its muscles and show more power. And the big thing, among others, for reasons why they're not scoring as many runs, is the power has not been there either. And a lot of their damage that has been done when they have hit home runs has been with not enough guys on base. They're not coming in those clutch spots, to put it another way. But the Braves walked into Sunday in San Francisco, where they'll wrap up their series with the Giants with a 27-36 record. That is 9 games under 500. That is 13 games back in the National League East. Last time the Braves were 13 games out was the second half of 2017. And not only are they 13 games out of first place, which obviously the Braves set their sights on winning the division every single year, they did it 6 consecutive years before really having to make an absolutely crazy push just to get into the postseason last year. They got in through the wild card. But you look at the wild card standings, which typically I don't really do until we get to about the All-Star break, really the trade deadline, where you start really sizing up which clubs are the ones that should be buyers and which clubs do you think will be sellers. Well, the Braves currently, as you look at the rest of the National League, have a better record than only 3 teams in the NL. One of those is the Miami Marlins, and the Braves, unfortunately, are closer to last place in the East than they are first place. They're only 2.5 games ahead of the Marlins. They're 13 games behind the Mets as far as first place is concerned. Other teams with worse records than the Braves at 27-36. The Marlins are 24-38. The Pirates are 25-40. And then there's a team out in Colorado that is 12-52, but has more wins this month than the Braves do. So, small sample size, sure, here in June. There's a lot of baseball left to be played this month and for the rest of the season, but the Braves have got to start playing a better brand of it, and they got to start doing it soon. Their second 6-game losing streak of 2025 is currently ongoing. That's another thing that hadn't happened since 2017. I think the Braves had gone maybe a couple of years without anything more than a 4-game losing streak before they had the 4-game, or before they went into 2024 and had their struggles over the final 4 months of that season. Multiple 7-game losing streaks. You got to go back to 2016 to find those. And that, of course, was right there in the middle of the rebuild when Fredi Gonzalez, current Braves third base coach, was relieved of his managerial duties and Brian Snitker took over. That's the last time that the Braves had multiple losing streaks of 7 games or more. If they lose on Sunday, that would put them in that position because we all remember how the season started, and that wasn't fun at all. Now, as of Saturday, they have a 9-game losing streak in games decided by 1 run. That's just overall their last 9 decisions separated by 1 run. They've lost them all. They were 9-9 in 1-run games prior to that, and now they're 9-18. And they've also lost 4 consecutive 1-run games just coming in to the action on Sunday. Now, I looked at Baseball Reference I was just going through the schedule, and I saw this little thing that said Baseball Reference playoff odds. And so I got curious. These playoff odds don't look great. How have these evolved throughout the season? Because I have to imagine they looked pretty good at the start of the year, and they're currently not looking so great. So these playoff odds include 1,000 simulations of the rest of the season based on the quality of the last 100 games a team has played. Atlanta's last 100 games, you might be wondering, they're 49-51 in their last 100 games. Now, this can span into the previous season, which obviously it does because the Braves have only played 63 games as of Saturday. But as we sit on Saturday with the Braves at 27-36, they have a 6.9% chance to make the postseason. Their winless June dropped those odds from a 33% chance on May 31st to just under 7%. They have a 6.4% chance to reach the postseason as a wild card. That checks out just based on the math. And a 0.5, a 0.5% chance to win the division. I mean, you look at a 13-game deficit, you don't need me to tell you how difficult that can be to make up in just under 100 games now. Because you're basically counting on not only you winning as many games as you possibly can, but some other team is going to have to decide to start losing a whole bunch of games that they're currently not losing, and that team would be the New York Mets. And yes, 2022 did happen, but an encore repeat performance of that, the odds are even longer this year than they were in 2022. And why is that? Because the Braves were never 9 games under 500 at any point, and they also hit the ground running in the month of June and started winning again and started pushing their way back into the picture and started trying to whittle away at that divisional lead. And again, the division is not the only way into the postseason, but even the wild card at 9 games out with only, 3 clubs in the National League behind you, those are some pretty long odds as well because you've got to climb over that pile just to try to claim that last spot. And we saw how crazy that could be at the end of last year. The Braves didn't get over 500 to stay until August 8th in 2021. Alex Anthopoulos, you heard mention that earlier on the show when I played that audio from earlier this week. The Braves finished their World Series championship season, regular season, 88-73. They just ended up running away with the division late. To win 88 games in 2025, the Braves will have to go 61-38 over the next 99 games. That's a .616 winning percentage. That winning percentage is higher than the 2022 Braves, who won 101 games, or the 2023 Braves, who won 104 games. So this group, as currently comprised, plus whatever they may add at some point, would have to play better and more consistent baseball than that 2023 club or the 2022 club, which in the second half was pretty darn good. So basically a 100-plus win pace per 162 the rest of the way. Now, it took 89 wins to get into the wild card in the National League last year. The Braves got there on the last day of the season, and by virtue of the tiebreaker, another 89-win team was left out, the Arizona Diamondbacks, who led baseball in runs scored last year. The Diamondbacks didn't go to the postseason. So I just gave you what it would take to get to the 88-win plateau that they got to when they won the World Series in 2021, but it doesn't look so rosy no matter what. And the work that you have to do to get there is going to have to start very, very soon. Now, one other thing that is going on in the National League East that I did find to be sort of interesting is that not only are the Braves taking on some water right now, but so are the Philadelphia Phillies. Remember when we saw the Phillies a couple of weeks ago? They had won 11 out of 12. They beat up on the Braves. They took a series from Atlanta. Well, the Phillies have just proceeded to lose 8 out of 9. So all the steam they had picked up in their hot streak has also gone away. Now, overall, they're having a better season, a more capable season, and they're in the wild card hunt, and they have a manageable, I believe it's 3.5 game deficit behind the Mets with about 100 games to play. That seems like a much more workable scenario. But it just goes to show that no matter what, during a season, typically, you're going to find a rut or 2 or 3 that you're going to have to play your way out of, and the Phillies are also going through that right now. And as both of these teams, Braves and Phillies, are currently taking on water, the team benefiting from that is the New York Mets. The Mets have built a 13-game lead on the Braves and a big old lead on the Phillies as well. Braves are in 4th place, too, by the way. The Washington Nationals are in between the Braves and Phillies. So there is that whole matter as far as climbing the division standings are concerned. But the Braves are going to see the Mets 7 times this month. Now, I know it's June, and I can do the math, and I can look at that deficit of 13 games. Maybe you whittle a couple of those off. Maybe you get it under 10 by the time you see the Mets. It's going to be kind of tough to do that, though, but you start whittling away where you can. But if you're sitting on a 13-game deficit and you lose those series or get swept by the Mets in one of those series, or heaven forbid, both of them, I mean, you can kiss the division goodbye, I believe. I mean, I'm always one to let it play out. But if you're staring at a 20-game deficit before you get out of the month of June, somebody needs to come read you the last rites, because it's going to be a very tough season as far as winning that division is concerned, and it would put a serious dent in the Braves' hopes of getting into the postseason in general, but so does being 9 games under 500, where they currently sit and 9-18 in one-run games with a bottom third of the league offense. And even though you've been getting pretty good pitching, I mean, I haven't even gotten to talk about Chris Sale's been looking good. Spencer Schwellenbach, I feel like, has kind of righted the ship for himself. Grant Holmes has been strong. I mean, I've talked about Bryce Elder. If you told me I was going to do a whole show and I was going to talk about Bryce Elder before I ever brought up Chris Sale's name in 2025, I would have really wondered what was going on. But Bryce Elder, along with Chris Sale, and along with Spencer Schwellenbach, and along with Grant Holmes for the most part, has been and makes up a pretty quality quartet there. Now, the guy I left out there is a rather large name. His name is Spencer Strider. And I didn't want to talk about this before we get out of here as well. Spencer Strider has not looked like himself this year. Pretty safe to say. The velocity is down, but it's the location that's really hurting him. He was giving up home runs in hitters' counts and in pitchers' counts against the Diamondbacks as he got knocked around the last time out. He's just not consistent. And I didn't want to drag out the audio because I can just go ahead and tell you the too long didn't read version is. Spencer Strider is incredibly self-aware and incredibly harsh, I think, with his criticism or his assessment of his outings. And as the case may be, he's also brutally honest. Maybe that's the best way to put it. And he knows he's not where he needs to be. And the only way for him to get better is to continue to go out there and pitch every fifth day. But this is just another thing that you put on the laundry list of stuff that the Braves can ill afford right now, is it taking too long for one of your starting pitchers to really round into form and to at least keep you in ball games. And Spencer, it's been a mixed bag. He's had 2 okay starts and 2 not-so-great starts. What will we see moving forward? Again, the jury remains out. But they need Spencer Strider, that's for sure. They need him to step up and play a role for this club. But the pitching, at least in the starting rotation, has been pretty acceptable. The bullpen, that's been another story, especially lately, and they're going to have to sort out the Raisel Iglesias deal. Who could do some closing? Obviously, we saw Pierce Johnson is going to be tasked with that. He has not got a long list of accolades as a closer. He did it in Colorado a few years ago, but that's a totally different animal. But they're going to need somebody to slam the door, get those last 3 outs. And then they're going to have to get that, reverse engineering thing I was talking about, get that going. And I think Alex Anthopoulos, if he's not already, is probably going to be on the phone trying to find some help for this bullpen if his club can get back to even ground and keep its head above water as we approach the All-Star break, which, All-Star voting opened this week, and I'm sure Braves fans rushed to the polls given how great they're feeling about the state of their club. But, there are some guys that are doing what they can this year. There's just not enough of them. And honestly, the All-Star is not the accolade you're looking for. It's what you can do in the postseason that the Braves are setting their sights on. But either way, it is looking a little rough here in the second week of June. That'll wrap things up for this edition of From the Diamond. Coming up for the Braves, they will face the San Francisco Giants and then the Milwaukee Brewers to wrap up their road trip and come home and face the Colorado Rockies, and they might want to sweep that series. Just an idea. I'll be back with you next week, next Sunday, right here on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. And until then, so long, everyone.